Hi there, Glocal Citizens. Welcome back to the podcast that inspires a borderless mindset around manifesting a new world. I am your host, Florence Adu, and it's that time of year in most of the Northern Hemisphere. It's called Back to School. Students of all manner, from first-time learners to adult continuing educationers, are migrating to a learning institution near you. Kindergartens, middle and high schools, trade colleges, university campuses, and some are taking to phones, tablets, or computers for online courses. 'Tis the season for getting the mind ready for a new round of training, building, and expansion. So, this week, in preparation for the start of classes, it's a review session with some Glocal citizens firmly planted in the business of education. Taiye Ayoola-Adedeji, author of the innovative, educational, and interactive Yoruba English bilingual book, The Yoruba Soundbook for Children. Ayobisi Osuntusa, executive director of Sesame Square Nigeria Foundation, a mirror image and partner organization of Sesame Workshop. Nisha Ligon, co-founder and senior advisor of Tanzania-based Ubongo, Africa's leading kids edutainment company, and videographer, composer, and musician Farai Malianga, a tenure-track professor at Florida State University with a focus on music for dance and choreography, all join us with insights on learning, education, arts, and people. Classes in session. Let's leap right in.
Yeah, so I'm a Yoruba woman. I'm proudly so. Yoruba people are located primarily in the southwestern region of Nigeria. But what a lot of people do not know is that there are actually Yoruba people in Benin Republic, which is a neighboring country to Nigeria, and Togo. And because of the, I hate to say this, but because of the slave trade, you find Yorubas actually are in Brazil and Cuba as well. And so over 40 million people speak the language, and that's such an astounding number of people. But oftentimes people don't even know that too, including people who are Yoruba. And so for me, it's sort of like a mission to sort of get the word out to everybody to say, hey, this Yoruba culture, Yoruba people, it's a rich culture, it's a rich language. We are everywhere in the world. We need to be known, and we have a message that can impact the world positively, because there are still some key components to being a Yoruba person, I guess, some key principles that we abide by, generally speaking. I mean, I don't want to be descriptive here, but there's something even called omoluabi, which is a person that has integrity, that's honest and trustworthy. And I know many generations ago, there was emphasis on that, meaning that if you were going to show up in the world, you better be an omoluabi, which means you better show up in the world as someone with integrity, that's trustworthy and honest. And so for me, I'm trying to get back to those roots and trying to remind people that are Yoruba and even other people who may be interested about these principles that we need to go back to.
I mean, you said it a lot in that, because I think where we are experiencing the biggest crisis in our human evolution is with this idea of being good people and that integrity and showing up with kindness. So yeah, I love that you have that as, and the words, I feel like oftentimes the English language doesn't necessarily communicate the depth of the emotion that is in some of the words that are in our tonal languages.
Absolutely. To piggyback off of that, Yoruba is such a tonal language, and you're right, English doesn't do it justice. We have things like oriki, and I don't know if you're familiar with that, which is like a poetic pronunciation or poetic, it's a poem in the form of a song that is oftentimes crafted to imbibe lessons and pass on lessons about someone's lineage, their ancestry, what their ancestors have done, what's expected of them, who they are in the world, who they're expected to be in the world. So in a short 1 minute to 3 minute span, when you hear that song being, is it song or sang now? I oftentimes that the tense.
Oh, right.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, when the song is sung, I guess we could say that.
Oftentimes when you hear, let me phrase it this way. Oftentimes when you hear people singing the oriki, it moves you in a way that if you were to translate that to English, the meaning would be lost, right? And then, there are lessons even in the cultural practices, such as like in the mornings or whenever you see an elderly person, you're expected to bow and prostrate. It's like in Yoruba, to curtsy is to kunle. So that's for the females. The women will do that with the girls, and then the males would dobale. And so for me, part of what pushes me to really embody these cultural practices and try to get other people to wake up to it is that it's helping me raise my children, right? If I can pass on these principles to them in the form of culture, then there's less work, hopefully, for me ahead of, when they're much older. I don't really have to spell too much out because I'm already teaching them how to be humble, how to be respectful, and all these other principles that parents oftentimes want to pass on to their children.
And I want to add that there's Yoruba people also in Ghana in the form of Ga. So the Ga people, I'm a Ga. So the Ga people, our roots are Yoruba land. So there's definitely that.
That just gets me so excited, because it unifies us in some way. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, when you think about the African continent, we've been conditioned to separate ourselves from each other, but really we're so connected in our cultural practices, in our beliefs, in our principles, in just a lot of things. And so that excites me that you are God. I met somebody recently that said she was that. And no, actually, this person was from Kenya.
Oh, okay.
And she mentioned what her tribe was, her ethnic group. And, because I had guessed that maybe she was, her husband was Nigerian. She said, oh, no, we're not. We're Kenyan. But his ethnic group traces their ancestry back to Yoruba land.
Yes.
You see how interconnected we are. Mm-hmm. And so this excites me.
Yeah.
How did can I ask you now? Can I turn the tables back on you and ask you how you found out that you can trace your ancestry back to the Yoruba people?
Sure. Well, my parents, our conflicts between the Ghanaians and Ghanaians and Nigerians because of the histories or whatever. So my parents wouldn't necessarily share that with me growing up until I started to live in Ghana and start to understand, I had a friend once who was speaking Yoruba and I was hearing what he was saying. So I was kind of like, that sounds like Ga. Like there's something about it that sounds a bit like Ga. And so I, asked and I said, oh, is there something similar? And so then my cousin was like, oh yeah, we come from Yoruba land. So yeah, so it's just, just being more with my family and everyone. It's just like, yeah.
So you're my sister. Hello, sis.
Oh, obviously. Yes.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So let's talk about how you came to be doing what you're doing.
We are created for a particular purpose in this world. It's not just to go to work 9 to 5. There are specific tasks that I think we individuals are tasked with, right? That we must impact this world before we leave it. And so for me, when I started to really think about what my passion could be, and then after having children and trying to pass on my culture and language to them, I felt that a light bulb went off in my head to say, this could very well be how you impact the world, right? You're trying to pass on these principles to your children. You're trying to make sure that they learn about your culture and pass on a sense of identity to them so that they can show up more fully aware of who they are in the world and not necessarily ascribe to any labels that may be put on them, right? Being African or Black, all these different labels that come with their own sets of stereotypes, right? So for me, it was important to pass on this culture to them so that they can be fully aware of who they are and can show up more authentically in the world and be proud of who they are. And so in so doing, the idea came that if you're thinking in this manner, there are probably other parents or people just like you in the world that want to do the very same thing. But unfortunately for them, either they don't have the time, the energy, the passion, the zeal, the resources. Why don't you create something that would serve as a resource to make it easier for them to do exactly what you're trying to do with your children? And that's how the book was birthed, right? It came about 2020 during the pandemic. As soon as the pandemic hit, I said, instead of giving into fear and giving into anxiety about the unknown because there was so much going on in the world. At the same time, there was, if you listen to the news, it was just bad stuff going on. I said, instead of giving into that energy, I'm going to harness that and redirect it to something productive and positive. And so I started this journey in 2020, and it was a lot of sleepless nights, but that's how I knew that it was really, truly passion, right? It didn't bother me that I had only a couple hours of sleep a night. I was just excited to get up and get to this work that I believe is now my calling.
So it's the pandemic. You've decided that you have this passion to do this, to create this book. And I'll give you a little background, because my mission and why I moved back to Ghana is to teach, to be able to share Ghanaian languages with, first of all, helping literacy in Ghana, because in many of our schools, children are learning in a foreign language when they start, because they're learning in English and they don't speak any English at home. So it becomes this really difficult challenge of learning your first conceptual visualization of words and numbers in a language that is not your own. So that has been like a driving force in the work that I'm doing, creating educational teaching and learning materials in Ghana in local languages. And so when I see your book and I see that this is something that translates not only in the U.S. context, in the multiple diaspora context, but also in Nigeria, because I feel like this is also a tool that can be used in that space. I want to understand how you went about assembling your team and then going with the production, because that's a big piece of this, because this is not just a book. This is a learning tool. So tell us more about that.
Quite an interesting journey, right? You can have an idea, but getting it to the finish line, getting the finished product is another thing.
Yes.
And so when you say assemble my team, I think the team just naturally came in the form of my parents, my mom, who was with me at the time, with us, my husband and I and the kids at the time, my husband, and then I relied also on my oldest brother. So it was a combination thing. And of course, I would engage my dad from time to time on certain things. So it was really a family project. And then, of course, my siblings, they have their lives, their own lives. And so they're busy in their own way. And so, I would just call certain people for certain parts of different things to run some things by them. So essentially it was the entire family that was involved in this process, primarily driven by me and with the idea that I believe God gave me. But that was it. I didn't have an institution behind me. I didn't outsource the creative part to any company, from registering the company that serves as the umbrella and the publishing company that birthed it, through which I was able to birth this book. I went through the process of registering that on my own, the creative process in terms of even dictating the words. It's my voice. My voice sounds a little different now because, again, I'm getting over something.
No problem. But you have a voice for it. Yes.
I drank my honey and lemon and I got to work. Yeah. So the singing in the book, I did that, because for me it was important to, oftentimes I believe that the intention with which you do something translates, right? The intention. And so for me, it was important to be as much as involved in this project as I possibly could be. Now, I don't have all the skills. And so the technological aspect of it had to be outsourced, but the outline, the content, the voicing, the singing, the translation, everything was driven primarily by me. And I say that with all humility, of course, with the support of my family as well. So that's really how it came about. I did it in my home. And then once I had an outline of what I wanted to include in the book, which I based that specifically on my own children, because they served as the inspiration, right? This book is for little kids. It's everyone can use it, right? Because language doesn't change just because you're 40 or you're 20 or you're 2. If you're going to start learning a particular language, you have to first learn the basics. So everybody can use this book. It's an educational tool for everybody, but it's branded for children because I was using my kids as my inspiration and as my muse to figure out what they would like and what potentially other children would like. So once I got that outline, it was now a matter of finding the right vendor, the right company to help produce this book because I don't have the technology in-house to do it. And that process was interesting because I called some local American companies, and I don't think they understood what I was trying to accomplish. And I don't know if they were interested because it's a cultural book, right? And maybe they didn't even know what is Yoruba, So I realized that if I went that route, I probably would have been delayed longer than I wanted to be. And I had this sense of urgency for some reason to really get this book out quickly. Not compromising the quality, but in my head, there was a time frame by when I wanted to get this book out. And so if I had kept calling all these American companies, I probably wouldn't have been able to produce the book, because I don't think that the people that I interacted with understood my vision, my mission, the purpose of the book, and even the market. I don't think they understood that, but I understood it. There was a sense of urgency for me. I'm dealing with my kids who I'm trying to pass on the culture to. I'm sure many other families are in that same predicament. And so I understood the market, that there was a market for this. There was an audience that was going to really be impacted by this work. And so I went out there and searched, and luckily found a company that seemed to be the right fit. And I took a risk by giving them my PI,
IP.
IP. But every business venture, every idea you want to materialize, you have to be willing to take a risk. And so that's what I did. And so far so good, in the sense that I haven't heard anybody, duplicating exactly what I was able to publish.
Okay, so Sesame Square came to being after the first project. We had a project before then, Adventures of Kami and Big Bird.
Mm-hmm.
And the thrust was about trying to educate early learners about HIV/AIDS and the importance of staying away from other people's blood and not getting infected, not if they were touched or inappropriately by people older than them, what they're supposed to do. And we talked about losing somebody in their family to such a disease and how to cope. So, cope mechanisms. And I think we did a very good job because we used puppets.
Mm-hmm.
We use stick puppets actually to tell stories, because those are some things that it's very difficult to discuss with children at that age. We're talking about ages 3 to 5. So we use puppets to tell lots of stories, and we gave them puppets to tell us stories. And unfortunately, we heard things that we thought we would never hear before. We never thought we'd hear in our lives. How adults who were supposed to protect children were not protecting the children. We even heard about just some terrible things. And they were telling us the stories, and they were telling the teachers the stories. And when the teachers related and they told us some of the things they learned, it was, it was like a weep fest. We were very, very upset about it. But at least now they had ways of connecting to adults, ways of going to people who are safe and they're ready to protect them. And we had situations like that about 2 girls that I can remember in Abuja itself. And at the end of the day, the community trained them, the community helped them, and they were able to at least graduate primary school. So from there, USAID noticed that we had this connection with the community. And that's when Sesame Square came to being. They decided that this is the opportune time for them to make an impact in Nigeria. And we developed 78 video segments that were aired on TV from 2011 up to date. It's still being aired on TV. And when it was aired in Kano State, which is in the north, and Nasarawa State, through NTA, the local education authority contacted us. No, the television authority, sorry, the local television authority contacted us and said, we need this. We need these episodes in the local dialect in the north because it's making an impact. We had over 3 million children watching the show that we could account for. And I'm sure there were many more millions that we couldn't account for. And the teachers were using it in the classrooms, and it was making an impact. We're able to do an external study, and the increment in literacy was noticed. I can't remember the percentage precisely. So the Northerners were like, okay, English is going well in the southern parts of the country. Can you do this for us in Hausa? We would like to have this. And USAID heard their cry and decided to extend the project. So we translated half of the video segments into Hausa, and the northern states, about 13 of them, contacted us and asked us to give them the 38 episodes. And then
Mhm.
USID decided, let's go a step further. Let's develop some of the other materials that we were giving schools and translate them to Hausa as well. So we translated the storybook into Hausa, we translated the training manual into Hausa, and all these other add-on materials. Then Ariwa 24, the latest network, television network for not just Nigeria, but all West African Hausa speaking countries,
Mm.
approached us and said, those 38 episodes that you translated into Hausa, we want to air it on our own television station so that we can reach children in other countries that speak the language. And he gave it to them. And
Mhm.
apparently, presently, they're trying to get the other 38 episodes as well so that
Mm.
they will translate it into Hausa
Mhm.
and they will have the full 78 episodes on air. So
Mm.
we're hoping that some funders might come and give us some more money so that we can produce more of these educational television programs.
Right.
So, yeah, so that's where we're at right now when it comes to building the capacity of our teachers to train these children and for the children to have access to this television program that teaches them the foundational topics in reading and in mathematics. And
Nice.
then the most interesting thing is that we also included our culture. So
Right.
in the program, you will see the children kneeling down. If that's the way they greet themselves in Yoruba culture. We have the Hausa children also bending, and they're wearing the Nigerian outfits. So it brings it home, you know,
Right.
and makes us proud.
So, being in the industry and seeing the lack of African faces for children in the content that's delivered to them, it's like very much I want to applaud those networks that are seeking it and wanting it and hopefully supporting you all to develop more. But I want you to talk a little bit more about Hausa because Hausa is an important language in the West African region and even a little bit beyond West Africa. So tell us a little bit more about Hausa and why that was so important besides the demand for it, but the reach of it.
Yeah, in Nigeria, the Hausa speaking community, they're mostly found in the north. And
Mm-hmm.
the religion in the north is Islam.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things about Nigeria is that we look at each other as brother and sister, regardless of where you're from. I know that there's been some infractions here and there, but ultimately we're all one. And since we're one, we would like to all move at the same pace. Now, the people in the north, now this is my view,
Mm-hmm.
the people in the north, they're a bit like the people all over, to be honest. The interaction between adults and children in Africa or in Nigeria is very different from like in the United States, where your mother will sit and you probably go and lay your head in her lap. You have a nice discussion, you interact, you play together. You can pretend to be a fairy, your mother too will pretend to be a grasshopper, and you guys will play together and have a wonderful time. In Nigeria, that's not our culture,
Mm-hmm.
you know? That interaction is not our culture. Fortunately for the southern part of Nigeria, we have a lot of expatriates. We have a lot of foreign infusion into the culture. So you're seeing a change in that region. But in the north, it's not like that. It's still a little bit separate, the interaction between parents and children. And it's part of the Hausa culture. So we wanted to find a way whereby we will subtly get entrenched parents and children to work together, to play together. So that's why the television program is important. When it's on TV, it's at home. So your
Mm-hmm.
parents are there. So they
Mm-hmm.
see what you're watching. They can ask you questions. They can integrate some of the activities that they see on TV into real life. And we don't want to change anybody's culture, but we want to change the interaction between adult and children, between mother and child, between father and children. We want them to have a relationship that they can build on in the future that will strengthen the connection between them and
Mm-hmm.
at the same time encourage their children to learn more.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that I've realized, and I'm looking for ways to ensure that this happens. So if it happens in the north as it's happening in the south, we'll see that the way people will relate with one another will be different, will be more positive. And if you start from the level we're starting, which is ages 3, it's
Mm-hmm.
at the foundation level. And the
Mm-hmm.
hope is that it will continue to grow and it will continue to elevate the perceptions and the relationships that we have.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And what's key is that there's a culture of language, right?
Yes.
And so
Yes.
that is at the heart of this idea of like, how do you respect culture and recognize the language, but then teach different ways of using vocabulary and using language to activate action.
Recently, we had to do some research
Mm-hmm.
and we were doing some research and we wanted to go to, well, we actually went to the camps, the IDP camps.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the camps was predominantly Hausa speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Another camp was Kanuri. So we had to translate the some new episodes that we're making for Sesame. They're brand new, and it was actually targeting international, I mean, different countries. So it's an international program so that they can use it in more than one country
Mm-hmm.
and in more than one language.
Mm-hmm.
So the Swahili, it was tested in Swahili, it was tested in Hausa, it was tested in Kanuri and some other languages. There's a new program. It was also tested in Yoruba.
Okay.
But the interesting thing was that when the Kanuri group, when they watched the Sesame program in their language, they said the mothers, okay, we did it in dyad. So we included guardians.
Mm-hmm.
So guardians and their children were watching together. So
Okay.
when they heard it in their language, the guardians, they held their mouth and they're like, what? This is in our language? Wow.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And they kept on asking us at the office when the parents kept on saying that it taught them to love one another. And they're like, but that wasn't the objective of the program. And we said that because it's in their language,
Right. They could
and
hear it.
because it's in their language and they could hear it, the emotional connection was higher than the academic connection.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So even though they were teaching the children to learn their ABCs or their one, two, threes. In the program, they were, I think there was a child in a wheelchair and they were helping the child. And that's what they were looking at. They were thinking, wow, that's the emotional contact was more important to them than the academic. And that's what your native tongue does. It
Yeah.
brings in closer. So you jump all those hurdles, all those things in the way, and even the messages that you might think you're supposed to be putting out there. What they saw was love, because if you have a language, your own traditional language, and you want to communicate something that will pierce the heart, you don't use the foreign language to do that. You use your native tongue to do that, and
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I'm very grateful for. Even though we grew up in the US, my parents spoke only Yoruba to us. So I understand it very well.
Mm-hmm.
And if my mom wants to tell me something that she really wants to hit home, she says it in our language. She doesn't say it in English. So
Right.
that draws children closer to you. When
Mm-hmm.
you speak that language, it's like there's an extra connection with the person that is speaking it.
Yeah, so gosh, Glocal speak. So I'll give you some Bongo speak. So we
Okay.
we started as a Kiswahili organization, and then now we're like Kiswanglish, and we're trying to like move more over to English because
Peaceful
we've
English. I
hired
like that.
people from across the continent who now like the Nigerians and people
Yeah.
from Cote d'Ivoire don't understand Kiswahili. So we've kind of almost created our own vocabulary around some things and
Mm.
our own speak that other
Mhm.
people kind of start to pick up on, even if they're not Kiswahili speakers. So one word that we start, it's almost like grown in its significance that we use a lot is utu, which in
Utu.
Kiswahili is shared humanity. So it's equivalent. I think a lot of African languages have an equivalent. So Ubuntu in South Africa, it's really kind of the same concept and same meaning. And for us, it started to just feel like Utu embodied so much of what we were trying to teach and achieve. You know, it's not so much about the math or the science that we're teaching, but how is it? I think in South Africa, they define Ubuntu as I am because we are. And that just really summed up the way that we wanted to work as an organization and how we wanted to teach kids. Whether, you know, they're learning about the environment or about diversity or, you know, some specific thing that they're learning for school, how does this fit into the context of their community and their friendships and all of that? So we use Utu a lot, and we've almost kind of turned it into a verb in English. So like, how would you Utu that as an adjective? That's very Utu of you. And it pops up now even in our scripts too. So it's quite interesting how that's happened, but it's such a local concept, right? Even in Tanzania, like everyone will have heard the word Utu, yet a lot of kids don't actually know what it means. It's just got this sense of kind of like humanity. And what it's been doing is we kind of grab it when we need to define a nebulous concept, but that it talks about connection and coming together, and I think has been a bit of a grounding concept for us there. And now our new season of Ubongo Kids we've just launched is themed around Utu, and it's Ubongo Kids Utu, and kind of taking that concept and hopefully teaching it beyond East Africa too.
Nice. I like that, Utu, and creating a verb around it. That's nice. So tell us more about expanding into other languages. So how are you, we worked together bringing Ubongo to Ghana. So that was a lovely experience. And now it's on, I think, every Saturdays and then once during the week. And then it's like Ubongo hour. So it's Akili and Ubongo, which is wonderful. And so how did you further expand? How, you know, what was that process? What's the kind of the ins and outs of being able to, I guess, become a syndicated children's show across Africa?
Yeah, there's no one model. It's been kind of figuring it out as we go and different in every place. But what I have to say is that, like, Florence, you and Leap Transmedia, like being able to have people who came to us and had interest from other places and say, hey, we need kids content here. How can we work together? Really was fundamental for our thinking and us realizing that this is not about us as Ubongo kind of building an empire and dominating and trying to be the Disney of Africa. It's about finding the right people and partners in each place who are going to understand the local context, figure out how it needs to work there, and also kind of advise us from the content through to the distribution of like what's going to work here and what do we need to know. So that's, I think you were really one of our first partners who we did that with, and we learned so much from, you know, bringing our shows to Ghana. And of course, one of the things that we did learn as we were expanding was like one of the most critical changes needed to make was adapting to more local languages. So kind of over time, if we tested and experimented and partnered with different people, we've now kind of come up with a 3-phase approach to our growth, where the first phase is just focusing on getting a foothold and getting some broadcasts. So we take our content in the languages we already have. It's mostly either English or French or sometimes Kiswahili if that's spoken locally, and just get it out somehow on a TV station to start building an audience and start learning from that audience. So that's zero adaptation, but just kind of putting it out there. And then we can learn through that about the needs of the local audience until we're ready to put it into the second phase, which is usually adaptation. So figuring out which local languages does this need to get in, to what degree does it need to be adapted. So sometimes it's a bilingual English and another language. Sometimes it's a full adaptation dependent on the school system and what parents are interested in, and just like what languages kids are speaking and what languages broadcasters are willing to show. So with that adaptation, we're also looking kind of 360 degrees around the support. So we're adapting our TV and radio programs, but then also providing social media support. We have a WhatsApp bot now. I'm starting to launch SMS services. So there's a much greater degree of investment that goes into adapting so that we can engage the local audience and achieve better learning outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of the third phase that we're just moving into now, Tanzania's there, and we're kind of moving Kenya and some other major markets into this phase, is figuring out, once you've got it locally adapted and really high engagement among, say, the 70 to 80% of the population who can reach on broadcast media, how do we reach those underserved populations? So figuring out how to get to rural areas, how to ensure that content is accessible for children with disabilities. We've been doing, experiments with Kenyan Sign Language, Tanzanian Sign Language, and kind of figuring that out. So with these 3 steps, there's a lot of learning that we can do along the way, and it also makes it a little bit more manageable rather than being like, if we're going into Nigeria, we have to reach every kid in Nigeria. Now we understand, okay, this is what we're going to do first. And we know at least we have a pathway to getting to those hardest to reach out of school kids, but it's just too big of a mountain to try and climb, starting with them first. We have to get an audience, get the partners on board, build some engagement, then adapt to local languages. And then we find a way, now that we have this stuff that works, how do we get it to everyone?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so in that context, we've just come off of, or we're still in and out of this pandemic life and lifestyle. So the idea of reaching those that are the hardest to reach is real. It's very real because, we have had children out of school for a year or so. So can you speak a little bit more about kind of your vision for being able to reach and impact and measure impact for those hard to reach areas?
Sure. Yeah. So this is something we've been trying to figure out for a long time, and we've been testing and piloting different approaches of, say, running rural screening clubs and things like that. And I think the main thing that we've learned, and luckily we learned this kind of before the pandemic, was that there is no one size fits all solution. If we have to scale this to all children in Africa, what we have to do is empower communities to be able to use whatever resources and infrastructure they have to be able to support children's learning. So at a broad scale, we can do that with national broadcasters, but then at a very local scale, we have to figure out what's going to work in each community. And we can't make just one, a one size fits all solution. So for the past kind of 2 years, what we've been working on is this concept of a toolkit, where a church or a local NGO, or even a young guy who runs what we call video bandas, these video halls, who's showing football matches, how does he use his excess time to show content for kids in a rural area? Because it may be off grid, but you've got English Premier League soccer showing, I don't care how remote it is in Africa, there's someone with a TV and a generator or a solar panel who's showing that. So finding ways of really seeing these people as our partners and intermediaries, and creating kits and easy to use guides and access to content for them to be able to utilize the content that we create in ways that make the most sense for their communities and the kids and parents who they're serving. So the key is really finding partners. And we don't mean just a partnership with the Ministry of Education or a giant bilateral organization.
Right.
We're talking, we need hundreds and thousands of super small scale partners. This Sunday school teacher, it's been amazing how kind of churches and even mosques have kind of picked it up and said, hey, we need more content for the children, especially while schools have been closed. So now our job is figuring out, how do we create things that can serve those people who have the direct access to kids and support them to be able to amplify the impact of whatever they are doing. So that's kind of our strategy, and we're still trying to learn, make things as adaptable and flexible as possible. So now we have an online platform where anyone can come in, register, search through our content by language, age, media format, right? So if you only have a speaker, you just grab the audio content. If you have an office where you can print, but no electricity where you are, we have printable versions of things that are printed off and take it. So doing that, and then USB sticks and SD cards, just trying to really make it so that no matter what technology someone has, they can find a way to use this content and also have some ideas and guidance upon how to best leverage it for make it, work for the kids.
I mean, when I was in school, I was one of them kids. I wasn't a bad kid in terms of I wasn't, breaking things or, cussing or whatever else. But I was definitely not a great student because the fact that my mind was other places. I'm a definite artist. So I hated being stuck. I hated being confined.
Mm-hmm.
So when I finally graduated and I was able to go to New York, I actually came here and they gave me a 3.8. And I was like, I don't deserve no 3.8 when I did my last year in high school in Colorado. I was like, I don't deserve no 3.8 the way I was doing. So I busted my butt senior year. I busted my butt. Graduated a year early. But so I was never a great student in terms of that's not where I was. I was a great student in terms of student of the world. I did things in my own sequence. So when I got the freedom to get to New York, I tried to get a job and do all the stable things. But I was like, man, I'm gonna do it my way. I'm gonna do it my way. And when you make that bold commitment to your art form, you sacrifice, right? You constantly have a choice. Do I make extra money or do I work on my craft? Do I work at this private school that I'm teaching at full time, or do I work part time at the private school and work part time in Brownsville with the charter school because I want to be around African American students as well?
Right.
Do I support this artist who I think is amazing and compose music for her, even though she's paying me, $500 when she should be paying me $5,000? That's the hustle. That's how we do. Because like if I got the opportunity to work with some of the most amazing artists, I worked with Camila A. Brown when she was first starting to develop and create her own thing. I worked with Crystal Brown, who and composed several pieces for her as she was developing her company. And she ended up going to Vermont and becoming a professor over there. I worked with Beatrice Capote before she got a position at Indiana University. And all these artists were hustling and creating amazing work. And they didn't have big budgets at the time, So that's how we work, as artists. That's been the last 20 years of just really being a part of working with the most amazing artists, mostly African American women, that were and are revolutionizing the dance world. But it came at a cost. I had plenty of summers when, I was like, okay, do I get bottled water? I'm gonna die of thirst. And I remember the first time I realized how stupid we live was the time when I was in summer. I literally didn't have enough money to go get the bottled water, and I was like, damn, I can't. What am I gonna do? And then all of a sudden I realized, oh, you can drink water from the tap. I forgot. Drinking Avion. It didn't occur to me that, you know what I mean? And that as silly as that story is, that was the key to me looking at things as you can always survive.
Okay.
If you're willing to sacrifice and then be creative. So instead of being creative only when I'm working with my music on my keyboard, you got to be creative in how you survive.
Sure.
Then all of a sudden you become fearless. And when you become fearless, then you decide what choices you're going to make, and you have to keep the faith that somehow that's going to work out.
Yeah.
Artists. And this is a manifestation of it working out. Because now, like you said, the difference, everything that I dreamed about, everything that I worked on my computer right here, I was going through my music yesterday trying to organize it. I have over 1,000 completed songs that I completed over the years. And now the students come to me and they're like, Farai, can we I'm trying to figure out if I need to do the African thing and make them call me Baba or something like that. But they call me by my first name. I'm not sure that's going to work, but I'll figure it out later. You know how we...
Yeah. It's something to think about. Yeah. It's so funny that you say that because I have a godson and I have friends who have young children, and I don't know, some of them are African and I don't know what happened with them. Why? Because even when we were growing up, like in the US, I never called an adult by their first name. It was always Miss something or Miss this. Like the family people were aunties for the most part. But it's interesting because there are a few of our family friends that we did call by their first names. And I'm like, why did we do that? Because now I'm like, no, I'm Auntie Florence. I'm not, I am. That's who I am. Like no one in Ghana would ever think of calling me by my first name. So it's so weird when young people are calling me by my first name. I'm like, oh, that's weird.
That's weird. Yeah. And it's interesting. Yeah. When I came here the first time, I was literally just like, letting it go and stuff, but Yeah, it's interesting. It is. I mean, I don't do it. Like even now, like when I'm talking to, my chair, I sometimes will call her by her first name. I'll sometimes say, if I'm in a public especially, I say Mama Angeli.
Yes.
When I see Jawole, I say Mama Jawole. To this day, so there's a certain level of respect that comes with that. But I mean, I know that there's no malintent, but my nephew does. He calls everybody with the title. Everybody, Miss. Yeah. My sister doesn't play, so we still keep that same tradition. I just try to make sure that I don't impose it on everybody. But for me, absolutely. At least sometimes, even with my friends, a little bit older than me, I automatically say, my boy who I play drums with, Uncle Ray, I call him Uncle Ray all the time. It's kind of partially a joke, but not really.
Right. It's just like reverence to, or just acknowledgement of your elderness or something like that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just weird. It's just so funny to say that. Yeah. So you'll figure it out. Either they're going to call, I mean, you're not gray enough to be Baba, kind of, sort of. So
unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately, because again, that's another construct of the website, right? Because Africans, you're proud. If you get old, people have to go get you the water. You should be proud. Yeah, I hit the 50 mark this year. So
if it's a number,
especially for 20-year-olds.
Yeah. Yes, it's true. If it's a number, like, it's funny you say that, because I never called any of my professors when I was in grad school by their first names. Mm-hmm. And even my mentor, he had to tell me to call him by his first name before I would call him by his first name. So yeah, that's, I don't know, something to think about.
Yeah. It's fun. Yeah, I mean, it's like one of my best students from back when I was in the charter school in Brownsville. Uh-huh. He just hit me up to congratulate me, and he's over at he's at Howard right now in Atlanta.
Yeah,
and he literally was like, he still calls me Mr. Malianga.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure how to get him to call me. I almost wish I like Brother Farai better, because it still shows a little bit of respect, but it still allows us to be a little more familiar than Mr. Malianga per se. But yeah, it's interesting, But yeah, he's Nigerian. His parents are Nigerian, so of course, it never occurred to him to call me by my first name, even though now we're cool.
Yeah. I don't know, just something to think about.
That's something to think about. It is a major issue. But the good thing about those kind of things, that we can laugh about them, but they do have a meaning. They do mean something. And I think for us, it's really tough, right? Because we are that generation of people that grew up as, we get to choose which African traditions we keep, right? To some degree.
Right.
But we have enough consciousness where we want to keep some of them, I've been accused many times by my Zim friends, because I don't speak Shona anymore. I don't speak my native tongue anymore. And so it's not something that I'm super proud of, to be honest with you. And I do want to continue studying and getting more familiar. But it always makes me laugh, because they will tease me for not speaking Shona, but they'll go by their English names.
Very interesting, right? Yeah, it absolutely is. It's like, how, right? Yeah, it's like. I've been recently listening to a summit. So I listen to these summits every now and then on a network called the Shift Network. So they do a lot of different, whatever, Qigong, yoga, whatever. But this one's on mystics. And so it's cultivating this kind of questioning in my head around the intersection between like all of the religious practices and what a mystic, like, and the idea that a mystic is across all cultures, right?
Yes.
So, and it's across all. So if a true mystic is not going to necessarily differentiate between a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Christian, et cetera, they may have their spiritual path, but in the mysticism that it's this more universal concept of the basis of divinity, right?
Right.
And so, I mean, just what in our conversation is just bringing to mind a lot of those conversations about like the ancestral lineage, like how do we pay tribute, and still preserve, but still recognize that at the core of all of this, there's just one. And that's one concept of divinity that should prevail in all of the conversation. So, yeah.
Yeah, you're talking the next level stuff, right? Because and that's the problem with me. Sometimes I find myself split psychology, right? There is, and a friend of mine, a good friend of mine once called me, I was talking about something about the universality of classifications, basically dealing with race issues. And she was like, you just post. I'm like, post? What do you mean by post? She's like, well, your concepts take away all of the discussions that people are having around their reality, because you're thinking so far ahead that it's not practical for people to be thinking that far ahead.
Exactly. And that's what I've been feeling. Exactly. That's what I've been feeling that for throughout. Yeah, exactly. Like my concepts are farther ahead, and it really takes the baby steps of de-indoctrinating humanity, from those things. And so then it becomes a question of, is it important to call me by my first name or not? So I guess that's what I was kind of getting at. It's like,
Big time, right? Exactly, yeah. But you're keeping certain things to be able to teach people things, like the racial construct. It's just a construct. But I'd be naive and stupid to say that we don't have to be proud to be black, because in order for us to get rid of the enigmas that come with being black or being African, I do want to support that. But at the same time, I can say, well, there's so much diversity within the black race. There's so many different types of Africans within the black race that it's kind of a misnomer for us to just assume that every person that has dark skin is going to automatically fit under that same umbrella. It's also crazy because what is it, brown paper bag test, or what exactly are we using to? I know a whole lot of people that people look and call black that have absolutely nothing in common with the most African things that I believe in. And I'm not saying that those things are not important, but it's just that let's really look at, like you said, the universal truths behind why we call ourselves what we call ourselves. And I think that's an important discussion. But yeah, again, when I'm working with my students, where do you have to meet people where they're at? The baby steps that you talked about. So that's a big struggle, especially being a teacher. It's like, okay, am I meeting the student where they're at and then taking them where they need to be? Or am I going to just, espouse my great understandings and they won't be able to use any of that information for themselves?
That's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. You can catch us with new episodes at glocalcitizenspod.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like, share, subscribe, leave us a review. We're still on that 100 in 2024 drive. So if you haven't already, please do. Best of luck to all of you folks that are getting learners ready or getting yourself ready to dive into the season of school starting. And until next time, bye for now.